Are the Vikings the 2022 Jaguars? Habitual self-inflicted wounds, bonehead mistakes, uncanny turnovers, but a red-hot turnaround rally brewing underneath? Are the Bengals the 2022 Bengals starting 0-2 straight up, 0-2 ATS, and looking pretty pedestrian doing it? Are they going to bounce back, or is this time different? We're back and we're searching for alpha in NFL Week 3. Let's hit the opening bet. It's 7:08 in Dime Square, New York City, Thursday, September 21st, NFL Week 3. This is Alpha Bets. I'm Deep Value Better with Throw the Damn Ball, Judah Fort Gang. Our plan of attack: run through some Week 2 scores from our drive quality model, review some upgrades and downgrades from our consensus market analyst rankings, and then run through the NFL Week 3 slate.
I'm so excited to be back. It's been a while. We had some bumps, but all clear for the rest of the season, I hope. And we can get back to doing what we do best, analyzing the market and trying to make some money and betting on football games.
Yep. A little bit of friction at the beginning of the season. A lot of projects that we've been working on off season just blew by, running out of time. Really wanted to prioritize some other things on top of the podcast. And we had some business travel. I got sick. So it was a little bit of a rough start, but we're back in action. I released a note, something I'll be doing weekly this year called Crybaby. Basically whining and crying about everything that went wrong in the previous week, and then highlighting some of the aspects that went right, of course, hopefully, and how we can improve on those mistakes that were made in the previous week, specifically from a live betting perspective. So in this week's inaugural note, I run through all the live trades that I made this Sunday. We didn't have a game trade, and game trade will be a little bit different this season. And actually, this episode too is a little bit of a hybrid of what we really want to be doing for the rest of the season. We're going to do shorter podcasts, probably do 2 a week, aiming to do one that Sunday night kind of tilt episode where we kind of do first reactions, run through what happened, run through the drive quality scoreboard on that Sunday night when it's the freshest and everyone's very looking for emotional support. We'll be there. And then later in the week, have another shorter episode specifically focused on whatever that next week's games are. So this is a unique episode since we're going to still be combining a little bit of those elements, but moving into the seasonal framework starting next week. So with this week, let's debut our drive quality app, total beta version, really just a way for us currently right now to internally be able to organize our drive quality information. But anything that you wanted to highlight first from week 2, Judah?
I mean, in week 1, it was just like, okay, offenses are going to be bad. And then, week 2 comes and offenses are much better. And it was a good reminder to sort of just take a step back, digest information, process change. And then there are a couple of teams, of course, that are going to stand out. I think the Bengals are one of them, as you led with. The Rams, too. And I think it's actually a really interesting spot and one to attack live, which is that, like, I had a strong offseason prior that the Rams were not going to be particularly good. And I'm much more willing to kind of come off that prior because I know, and we've seen in the past, that Stafford and McVay, or even McVay and Jared Goff can kind of put together some offensive success. And I'm willing to kind of lean into that change. But that's the name of the game at this point of the season, is kind of how do you react to change and how do you kind of balance that with your off-season priors. And that's a potential source of huge alpha. And the drive quality model really gets to that, trying to cut through sort of the noise of final scores we have on screen, the Vikings and Eagles. I mean, the Vikings have been the best offensive team by our drive quality numbers. And again, it might not sustain itself, but that is why we kind of build these tools to help us get a little bit closer to understanding these teams and trying to predict their performance in the future.
Yeah, early in the season, There's going to be a bunch of noisy outcomes, noisy performance, noisy data. And so that can also lead to potentially noisy outputs from even systematic models. You want to remain agile in your theses on these teams. You don't want to be stubborn and continue to lose money on a team halfway through the season because your priors just turned out to be flat out wrong. Maybe besides the Rams so far, Judah, would you say there's a team out there where your preseason priors, you're flirting with, maybe I was just wrong?
Yeah, I would say the Ravens. I was really wanting to sell them, especially offensively, the new system and Todd Monken coming in, and I wasn't really sure how Lamar would be as a pocket passer. And the numbers certainly suggest this offense will be good. I was ready to jump on board of the Ravens are going to miss the playoffs. They'll be a 7-10 team. I've cooled off a bit, and certainly our numbers support that.
Well, also the division complexion looks different today than prior to the beginning of the season as well. Again, injuries are starting to pile up across the NFL. And then there's, of course, the Bengals that we talked about. Burrow's still dealing with his calf injury. And I think that's a huge outstanding question right now. Is that first 2 weeks of performance from the Bengals akin to the first 2 weeks of last year, where, hey, they just didn't look good. They underperformed. They started off slow. But, hey, by week 8, week 9, and certainly by week 10, 11, 12, everyone was then, Bengals the top 3 team. Is that still in their DNA this year?
I think it's a very different situation. And even the defensive numbers we have here have not been particularly great. And I think that's revealing, especially because one of these games was against the Browns, who do not have a good offense by any stretch. I think there are 2 things that are different about this team. And again, they can turn it around. So I wouldn't necessarily be sell. But number one, as the contracts of Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, as those loom, the team on defense was built around having a lot of really just quality players who they didn't have to pay that much because they were having their 2 best players in Chase and Burrow on rookie deals. And a lot of those guys have now left. I'm thinking of the Uzes of the world. And when those guys start to go down, the weak links pop up more, and the defense is a little bit more skeptical. And I also think defense is going to matter more this year than in past years. The other part of this is the Bengals are as boring schematically as could be. They play 11 personnel. We've had hesitations about Zach Taylor for years. That's not new. I think you can kind of overcome that when you have Joe Burrow, T. Higgins, and Jamar Chase, and Tyler Boyd for that matter. They're terrific players. But I think the league is starting to kind of catch up to that a bit. And we saw the Mike McDonald of the Ravens kind of have a recipe of stopping the Bengals. We saw this in week 18 of last year and then again in the wild card. They put together a good performance against the Bills, but they've largely struggled outside of that. All of that lends itself to okay, maybe there's some pessimism about the Bengals. And we haven't even talked about the fact that Joe Burrow is not healthy. And he is a guy who uses his legs. I did some research about what I call true scrambles, which are essentially anytime you start the process of scrambling, whether it's a pass, sack, or run. And he gets a ton of production on these passes. And how many times have we seen Joe Burrow do that, a little shoulder dip, throw on the run, find his guy? And if he doesn't have that mobility, especially with the offensive line troubles, the Bengals are in some serious trouble. But at the end of the day, all of this can change so quickly.
Yeah, looking at the market consensus rankings across several different analyst power rankings. We're looking at PFF, ESPN, 33rd Team, Athletic, Warren Sharp, NBC Sports, CBS Sports, Yahoo, USA Today, NFL.com, using a mishmash of different approaches to try to get a broader aggregate view of how the broader market of influencers are perceiving the strength and weaknesses of teams. We see the Bengals downgraded 3 spots this week. They were downgraded several spots last week, currently ranked 14th right now. PFF is a market high on the Bengals, still has them ranked as 6th. The Athletic has them ranked 22nd at a market low. But NBC Sports, CBS Sports also right there at 21. But we can see after week 2, the Jets being downgraded 7 spots. Vikings and Patriots down another 5 spots. Our Vikings down to 23. When we look at our drive quality scoreboard, something that we've been talking about, how the Vikings are 2-0. Vikings, of course, lost to the Bucks in week 1, 20-17. Our drive quality scoreboard, again, looking at who performed best on a drive-by-drive basis, whose underlying on-the-field performance is demonstrable of sustainable success. And we're looking at the Vikings beating the Bucks by double digits, and then last week beating the Eagles from an EDP per drive perspective, right there with the Dolphins as an elite offense. And we're looking at the market rankings, having them as almost a bottom 25 team. That's wild. I think it's going to continue to present opportunities to bet on the Vikings moving forward. Anyone else that you think is not being downgraded enough or has been downgraded too much?
I think the Bucks are too high also, honestly. I think we're kind of seeing that. I don't think we've learned anything material about this team. Like, they recovered a bunch of fumbles in week 1, and then the Bears had a chance to win that game. It was 2017 with the ball in Justin Fields' hands with 3 minutes left. I don't see this as a particularly good team. So, the expectation was bad. 6.5 win total, bad. But, they still have Mike Evans. They still have Chris Godwin. The defense can still be fine. And then after 2 games, it was almost like, okay, that narrative is actually the true narrative, as opposed to just saying, these were kind of fluky games. They could have been determined very differently, and, nothing's fundamentally changed about the Bucs. Great. Baker Mayfield is a totally capable player when he's playing with a clean pocket. Go up against the Eagles this week when you've got Jalen Carter, dominating in the interior where your interior is horrible. It's a totally different story. But I don't think this is a particularly great team. The other one that does stand out is the Giants. We've seen, Danny Dimes crumble, and game script matters so much in the NFL, where if you have some fluky thing, a blocked field goal for a touchdown and then a weird fluky interception that also gets returned for a touchdown, and all of a sudden you're down 17-0 or 21-0, whatever it was. And the game fundamentally changes. And this is kind of why we have something like, drive quality and earn drive points. It's to cut through that noise, because that's not reproducible and sustainable. The way you play offense is very, very different when you're in a neutral script or when you're trailing by such a huge margin. That is not as revealing about the fundamentals of the team and how they're going to play in the future. How reproducible is their success or their lack thereof? And sure, the defense is not great, but the offense can put together some success. You don't score 30 points by accident in the NFL. I think tonight will be a really interesting test, but how much has really changed? How much should we really be changing our opinions on the Giants, as if all of this wasn't already baked in to what we knew about the team coming in from the preseason? And that's more of a 18-20 team, not a 25 team. They're not that bad.
I think potentially they get upgraded without Saquon Barkley, because they're not as focused on trying to force that element of their game. But elsewhere from the market consensus rankings, top 6 teams, the market seems pretty convicted, so no change. Niners being number 1, Cowboys number 2, Eagles number 3, Chiefs number 4, Dolphins number 5, Bills number 6. And then to round out the top 10, you got the Ravens upgraded 3 spots to number 7, Jags, Lions 8, 9, and then the Saints sneaking in as a top 10 team, upgraded 5 spots this week after an average performance versus the Panthers on Monday Night Football. You liked the Saints coming into the season, put in an average performance week 1 versus the Titans, which I warned about in the preseason that was likely going to materialize. But then even in week 2, even outside of that last stupid touchdown that the Saints allowed in that final drive, even still, they're just not clicking, at least at this moment. I know you were hotter on the Saints than many. And I know it was very division specific.
Yeah, I still think I am. And even our drive quality score has this as one of the better offenses this week. I think the main issue I have with the Saints is that they run the ball too much for a team that has incredible weapons. Rashid Shaheed, he's a little bit of a gadget type player, but it seems like he actually might be able to sustain his success. Chris Olave, I think he'll be in the same category of conversation as the Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hills of the world. The main issue is that they run the ball too much. And I think that was certainly the case against Tennessee. And I also think we're going to get these fluky games. That's a product of having a Derek Carr type of quarterback. But I think, honestly, And it comes with the caveat of I think the Saints actually played decently well, and the narrative might be a little different if it's wow, this team covered by 7 if they didn't allow that garbage time touchdown. But I think the Panthers defense is legit, and I think that's a Elijah Evero thing. If you look at, I talked about the Broncos for a second. The Broncos had a top 5 defense by our EDP last year and are dreadful so far this year. And I think that's very much a function of their losing their coordinator and bringing in Vance Joseph, who's not exactly built for modern NFL defenses. He kind of just lays back and does his thing. Elijah Evero is rotating safeties at one of the highest rates in the league. But I think that game says more about the Panthers than it does the Saints. And the Saints, the case is going to be they have a ton of talent on offense, but they run the ball too much, and their game management in the fourth quarter is just dreadful. And we saw this all of last season. I remember getting a backdoor cover on a 56-yard field goal by Matt Gay because the Saints threw a pass when they should have just run the ball. That would have ended the game. We saw this in the Tampa Bay game where they ended up losing, just brutal clock management. So I think the coaching is the biggest concern. At the end of the day, there's a ton of talent on this offense, and I'm still pretty high on them. I think we'll see them continue to succeed, even if it's been a little bit of a rocky start.
Yeah, one of the last teams to touch on before moving into week 3 is Washington. So NFC East, a division that we did not get a chance to do our preseason preview on, but a team that Judah and I both have deep out of the money futures on Washington winning the division. I think you have Washington win the Super Bowl.
Oh, yeah.
With one of them, right?
Oh, yeah.
And the market upgrading them, but still lukewarm on them. I think the market doesn't trust Washington quite yet. Still has them as a consensus ranked 20th. Market high is CBS at 8th. They're the only platform out there to rank Washington as a top 10 team. And then you have ESPN, 33rd team, Warren Sharp ranking this team as a bottom 23-24 team. So you're talking about a team that's going to have a top 6 NFL draft pick potentially next year. They're 2-0. And Sam Howell's done nothing, I feel like, but impress. I mean, yeah, he holds on to the ball too long. The offensive line isn't great. He takes a lot of sacks, exacerbates that weakness, but there's weapons to go around. The enemy effect is certainly paying dividends. And he's basically a rookie. This is his 3rd or 4th game. I'm very bullish on Washington moving forward.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the defense has been a plus unit for a while now, and their defensive line is just ferocious, especially now that Chase Young is back. And Montez Sweat is also seemingly really, really emerging. But I think the case with Howell is twofold. Number one, it's as you said, it's all relative to the rest of the quarterbacks in the league. And I think Sam Howell 4 years ago wouldn't be as valuable as he is now, but the baseline play of quarterback is really, really low right now. So relative to the rest of the quarterbacks, he's very good. That's one point. And the second is, yes, Sam Howell takes way too many sacks, and that's a huge issue, but that is the trade-off of standing in the pocket for a while and also being able to deliver 30-yard strikes to Terry McLaurin in a closing pocket because he's not afraid to kind of take that hit or hold the ball on for an extra second. I think you have to view those two as a trade-off between each other, which is yes, they're going to be sacks, but they're also going to be huge explosive plays and throws that other quarterbacks won't make or can't make. And there's going to be some variance because, some games you're going to have 6 sacks, and then another game, those 6 sacks will turn into 3 sacks, and they'll instead be 3 20-yard completions. So there's a ton of variance, but the key, and this is what I was saying the entire offseason, which is there is a right tail, though. There's a really fat right tail because Sam Howell can make throws that only the best quarterbacks can make. I know Joe has been beating the Sam Howell horse for a while. And it's kind of picking up these pieces. And
pretty much every 5 minutes now.
Every 5 minutes. It's he has his flaws, certainly, but he also has huge upside because he has a trait that most other quarterbacks don't have. And that's a very, very valuable one. And that's the ability to kind of work in congested pockets and throw the ball very deep and accurately downfield. That's a rare trait. If you can get all of the rest a little bit better, it kind of elevates that one singular trait that he has that provides huge upside for Washington. And you can put that in the context of the NFL, you put it in the context of the NFC, and it becomes a little more appealing.
And you talk about variance. Variance means opportunity to make money, to make outsized profits, especially when you have that risk reward profile for a specific team. And it really came out really in spades in week 1 and week 2, even more so in week 2. But I know in week 1, I know you were betting live Washington at a discount to come back versus Arizona. And then last week, one of the things I was writing about in my crybaby note was how I got Washington plus 1,000, plus 400, plus 10.5, plus 7, all on this kind of downswing in that first half. But because they have that DNA to be able to dig themselves out of those holes, and it played even better because obviously the opponent they were playing had the exact same kind of inverse profile of very susceptible to giving up big leads and not being able to sustain long, consistent scoring drives. So that setup was just beautiful. But I think there's going to continue to be those types of opportunities with the team, specifically like Washington.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And the last thing I'll say on that is just that's why this trade is so valuable, is because if you can deliver throws, especially downfield, when the defense knows it's coming and you can have success, right? That's extremely valuable because in that situation, you can be game script agnostic, where if a different quarterback who can't throw as well is down 21-0, you're toast, the game's over, because you don't have that quarterback with the ability to succeed even when the defense knows that you're passing.
One of the things that Darnell had mentioned in the chat, looking for Bills' first drive score to get some good commie numbers this weekend. And that can kind of bridge us into week 3, thinking about Bills, Washington's opening at home, plus 6.5, a little bit juice, plus 215 on the money line. And this kind of brings us to a team that we haven't really talked much about, is the Bills. The Bills still being ranked from a market perspective as a top 6 team. Did not look good week 1. Bounced back in week 2. But what I'm hearing is like, oh, it's just so obvious that the Bills were going to bounce back in week 2. No one was nervous. No one was nervous about Josh Allen and the Bills. There was pressure on that line on the Raiders all week. And then live, one of the things I talked about in the crybaby note as well is I got the Bills minus 1.5 about 6 minutes into that game after the Raiders went down the field, scored a touchdown. The next Bills drive, they go 3 and out or something like that and punt. And now all of a sudden the game is at pick'em. So that must have been free money then. Like, just pile into that one then, because the Bills are obviously going to come back and torch the Raiders. But no, even in game, into week 2, there was still doubts and questions around, oh, how good is this Bills team? Maybe they're not going to be good. Maybe this is like a carryover from week 1. And we did have questions about this offense, and they had shown like hitting some speed bumps at the end of last year. And even when I go back and look at their drives from last week versus the Raiders, you know, one of the things we have on the drive quality scoreboard is we count the amount of third downs that they get on a particular drive to help give us a sense of how fluid, sustainable, and reproducible that drive was. That's how we help grade some of the points that they earn on a drive-by-drive basis. In fact, one of the things I don't have on here is fourth downs. And the Bills were constantly running into third downs, fourth downs, third downs, fourth downs in order to convert some of those points into scores. And that's why our drive quality scoreboard, you see the Bills 27 to the Raiders 13. The game is closer from an EDP perspective than the actual final score. Not necessarily saying that the Raiders really outperformed, but that the Bills underperformed a little bit there, because several drives where it came down to fourth down inside the red zone, they go for it and they get it, and then they convert it into a touchdown. Just 2 of those go sideways. This game could potentially be a lot different. And for that reason, I think there's still cracks in the Bills. And for that reason, like Darnell, I will again be looking for an opportunity to get the commies, especially plus double digits in this game.
I mean, I obviously love that spot, but I'm skeptical of the Bills. I think there are some legitimate question marks from the second half of last season. I don't even care about the week 1 Jets game. That was a weird fluke, whatever. But there's legitimate question marks about Josh Allen and the turnover-prone nature. He's going to make too many mistakes. This has always been the case with him. We've got 5 years of data with this, and they really lack secondary weapons. I mean, Dalton Kincaid could turn into a great player, but rookie tight ends historically are just not that successful, and he hasn't exactly emerged as this different weapon where he'll have a historic rookie season. That's not happening. They lack secondary weapons, which I think will really come to kind of hurt them against defenses that can actually match up against them. They will take care of teams like the Raiders, and Josh Allen's so explosive that they can put up these huge performances. But I think they're going to be very matchup specific this year. They're going to struggle against defenses who can cover Stephon Diggs. And on defense that can't generate quick pressure, this has been an issue since Von Miller went down. There are massive question marks. I don't think they're the wagon that they were. If you asked me week 2 last year, week 6 last year, I've been like, Bills are the best team in the league. And I think we're very, very far from that. And it's actually a lot closer to kind of that like 6 to 10 range, but also not the dominant 6, where they can lose to a 23 team. They can lose to a Washington. I think that's
they're not an auto bet when they're down by 10 points.
They're not an auto bet. There are some serious question marks about this team, as there are for basically every team in the NFL. I mean, the Chiefs are almost the only exception. I would need a large sample of them failing to kind of back off. You're always skeptical of the Chiefs. You think it's the nice take to be skeptical of the Chiefs, and then
although I liked the Chiefs this week, and you were skeptical of the Chiefs.
I was skeptical. I was more optimistic about the Jags.
You actually were right. I mean, that was obviously a very bad performance by the Chiefs, and that was an ugly, ugly game. A game that people thought were going to be the highest scoring game of the week was the lowest scoring game of the week. And I think that's another good transition, thinking about what teams are auto bets, especially live. The Chiefs have always been that team. And then one of the things I lamented in my crybaby note this week was I was piling so far into the live total collapsing, expecting, there to be a bounce back in the game, that I had so much exposure on that element of the game that I did not allocate nearly as much as I otherwise would have on the Chiefs at basically even money, which is where they bottomed out at. I got like 1 unit on the Chiefs in that game. And then I had about 8 scattered across different totals bets, all of which lost. And so that was my biggest loser game. In fact, it really was like the only game that I lost money on. Again, this weekend actually there really wasn't too much to cry about, but I will always find an opportunity to cry about something.
That's certainly true. I feel like I just have like a visual kind of implanted in my memory of you just like, or just, making some
especially
face
the totals.
The Bears
like
did.
when the totals like it never goes the right way, and you get into a trade a little bit early, and you keep buying it as it keeps going against you, and it just never bounces. It just feels like you're drowning for 3 hours. Even though I was making money on other things, my single biggest bet on any one single theme was that theme, and it just never turned. And so it always left me feeling icky by the end of the day, even though by the end of the day I was up 20 plus units.
Yeah.
But so are the Chiefs still in auto bets? I mean, you're looking at a team that played the one of the things I keep hearing about is, man, the Jags defense played well. The Jags defense might be a little bit tough. The Jags defense sucks. The Lions defense sucks. And the Chiefs could not move the ball on either of those defenses. Now, it was in Jacksonville. It was like 125 degrees on the field. So maybe there's that asterisk that played into both those teams playing bad. But we've seen now back-to-back, even when the Chiefs had their lulls in the past, is not been this bad from an offensive perspective. I mean, it looks like they're playing with their feet in concrete.
I think they're just readjusting to kind of like not relying on Kelsey and kind of mixing in and learning who the receivers they want to rely upon are. They just have such a long track record of dominance that I need to see a lot more. By week 8 or week 6, if we're like this, like maybe I'll come off that.
What if the Chiefs score less than 20 versus the Bears this week?
That would be a huge red flag.
Okay, so it could happen this week.
That'd be a huge red flag.
Yeah. But there's already yellow flags. You have to admit there's yellow flags.
Time out. It's all about I'm not there yet. If the Chiefs score 20, here's how I envision this going. The market goes, we got to change everything we know about the Chiefs, and like that to me is going to be a hammer spot in week 4. Because I always want to be slower to downgrade the Chiefs in the market. That's all my point is.
That's fair. No, that's.
Yeah, I'm not gonna like. It would be a red flag, but I'm not gonna come off my take of like whatever the market says about the Chiefs. I always want to be more bullish on them. That doesn't mean buying in every case. That doesn't mean I'm betting the spread every week. But in cases like a live spot, which plays to their success, or if they're going to really downgrade the team, that's when I buy. That's the whole take.
So what about this very nasty, ugly spot this week versus the Bears, 13.5?
Yeah, I'm not touching it. I'm not touching it. There are a lot of, it's a very weak slate for me of pregame stuff. I mean, I think live will be an interesting look. I'll tease a little, I'm not betting KC Chicago. Chicago seems like a disaster. The Chiefs have a tough time covering big spreads that I'm not dying to bet a Chiefs minus 12.5. Maybe we can get a little bit of like scripted Chicago touchdowns, and if we get it at,
I mean, the sentiment is so bad on Chicago right now.
Yeah, it's dreadful. I mean, it's the organization's a bit of a train wreck, but I'm not betting anything there. There may be a couple.
Well, and one of the things actually I wanted to bring out was what you talked about last year for the Bears is when the catalyst for the Bears offense to actually start to raise people's eyebrows was after that Patriots game. That's when Fields started running. And we haven't seen that the first 2 weeks. Again, he hasn't been running. And, now he's shooting his mouth off, which leans to an implication that maybe he's going to start running more.
Certainly what he's saying would suggest that he is not scrambling and he wants to start scrambling. I think that's kind of the read between the lines of all this coach speak, whatever narrative this stuff is all about. But I think they've had 3 design rushes in the past 2 weeks. They were at like 6 to 10 by that second half last year when they were having success. That I would not be shocked if they start designing some Fields runs if this offense turns it around. And I think the reason I was on the Bears last week was because like their offense has been good. Actually, maybe not good. They've been like average, that like 14 to 18 range when they have Fields actually running and utilizing his legs. I think that's going to be pretty sticky, but it comes with the baked-in assumption of like, oh, they're going to play a certain style of football. And I don't want to necessarily back that until we actually see it. A great live spot, though.
Yep. I think, it's not that the Bears offense is good, but I think it's not as bad as warranted by broader market perception. And this is what the drive quality scoreboard and drive quality models intended to do is what we want to say is, oh, well, the Bears didn't lose to the Bucs as bad as the final score suggested. Well, we're quantifying that right here. So like basically the Bears lost by a field goal versus the Bucs when we look at it from an earned drive points perspective. In which that I feel like lines up even with the eye test because they were down 3 with the ball after having already went down the field the previous drive, 90 yards with 3 explosive plays, 58 air yards, 34 rush yards, a nice mix, and had a touchdown. 5.6 EDP drive. Mwah. Beautiful. Then they stop the Bucs. Get the ball back. They're down by 3. That's a pretty decent setup. Now, of course, Fields is an idiot and, throws a pick inside their own 10 that's returned for a touchdown and extends it to a 10-point. Like, come on. Like, the game was closer than the 10 points. So, our drive quality says it. So, nonetheless, it's still very difficult to bet on the Bears. I didn't want to bet on the Bears this week. Very, very difficult. And I didn't. For my own account, I did not bet on any Bears. Justin Fields rush yards, 49.5. Deep all 79.5. Go for 80 yards. I think he tries to force the issue in this game. Doesn't mean that the Bears don't get their, brains blown out. But I think Justin Fields potentially gets his rush yards. Any other games that you want to talk about next
I don't hate
week?
that. We talked about the Commies and the Bills. I think we could see an interesting game script where the Lions' run defense has actually been terrific so far this season. It's been absolutely dreadful at stopping quarter runs. I could very much see a kind of like Desmond Ridder, like 40 rushing yards built in with a Lions like minus 9.5 type thing. If you can get that like 10-1, 12-1, I can see the Lions kind of playing from a lead. We haven't seen the Falcons playing from. I mean, they were behind, I guess, in the second half against Green Bay, but in a pass-heavy game script with defenses clogging the lanes, and I think they lean on Ridder's legs in that situation. I think the Browns tight ends might be one of the ugliest games I can think of, but the Browns defense, especially if they end up with Zardarius Smith healthy and perhaps Greg Newsome as well, that would also be helpful. But I think Ryan Tannehill is a particularly sensitive quarterback to the situation that he finds himself in, and there's a huge mismatch on the defensive line of the Browns versus the Titans offensive line. I could see that as like building some like same game parlays of like unders, sacks, that sort of thing.
I really like the Desmond Ridder angle in the Falcons one.
Yeah, that's one.
So he ran the most last week than he did collectively through the last 3 games.
Yeah.
And it's a 14.5 right now. So yeah, boosting that out. If he gets potentially like that 30, 40 yards, I think that's definitely attractive.
Yeah. It's also, I don't think like he can run. That's certainly in college. That was the thing. The market has no way to price a game in which the Falcons haven't been able to run the ball efficiently. And if like we see more dropbacks from Ridder, that's going to mean more rushes. They also gave him a couple design runs last week, which I think we'll start to see getting more involved in the offense. It's a weak spot for pregame betting. I love the Eagles. That's my favorite play. We will be playing that in circa 100%. The Eagles might be a fringe, tier 1, tier 2. They have some question marks, but they're way better than the Bucks. And I want to kind of be fading the little bit of the selling of the Eagles and certainly the buying of the Bucks, as we talked about. But the rest all set up for live spots for me. There's not really much I love, and I'm not going to force the issue here. I think the Broncos and Dolphins is going to be a really compelling game. I was very bearish on the Broncos. Again, I'm willing to bail on my priors a little bit more when we're talking about a Sean Payton. Maybe he has something, and they show up extremely high in our ADP numbers, and that could very well be a function of some random, 2-game sample, and they played the Raiders and this, and they haven't had so many drives. But I think there are better spots to kind of fade certain teams, and I want to get a little more information. I'd rather bet that live than before the game. And I think that's kind of true of most of these spots. I'm like, I'll hold my nose and bet the Cardinals. Like I would, there's value on the 12.5. The Cardinals are like, we haven't gotten off the like, oh, this team is really bad. But I think they've played competitive games. They don't have that tank variable that everyone just assumes they have. The Cardinals are not tanking. Kyler Murray has every incentive to come back. They're certainly playing hard. The team that the market has as 32nd is almost never as bad as the market says. I think the Cowboys are going to be boosted because they've absolutely dominated the Jets and the Giants. They beat the Colts 54-13 last year. We've seen this happen before. How much do we really know about the Cowboys? Is it that much different? Are they really the second best team in the NFL now? I don't think so.
There's no evidence to suggest that they are.
No, there's no real evidence. No. If anything, our drive quality stuff says that they're a little bit fraudulent.
Mediocre.
I'm not gonna fully buy in and be like, through 2 weeks, the drive quality is the truth. But it does point to a little bit of a sell signal, at least relative to market expectation, that I might hold my nose because 12.5 is a huge spread. And it's kind of baking in the fact that like the Cowboys are the best team and the Cardinals are the worst. And I think that gap might not be so huge.
I think also what you're referencing around the Broncos, scoring well from an offensive EDP perspective. Again, it's only through 2 games. It's actually only through a handful of drives. They have some of the fewest drives in all of the NFL. There's only 6 drives in week 1 versus the Raiders. And so they're basically the 3rd best offense from an EDP perspective.
But I don't
you have to take that with an asterisk.
Yeah, for sure.
But what I think that is sufficient evidence of is this is no longer the offense that is going to struggle to eclipse more than 15 points in a game. I think they're going to be able to score points, but I think the offense is still going to be vulnerable to going through like long droughts of not scoring. But I think the distinction between this year and last year is basically when you saw an inkling of like, this Denver offense can't move the ball, like it's hands off, then this year there might be opportunity to buy that dip for Denver kind of intra-game.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's actually a better way of framing how I feel about the team. And I love how you're kind of using that as a live betting game plan.
I think one of the last games I want to hear your thoughts on too is Texans-Jags. So I know Texans are dealing with like injuries as most teams are. Again, I don't think the Jags-Chiefs game was any signal around the Jacksonville defense being good. And the Jaguars through 2 weeks have shown no evidence that they're a more mature team than they were last year. Still putting themselves in bad positions to not capitalize when you think that they otherwise should.
Maybe, again, there could be some sort of value there, but these are not. It's large enough that I'm not betting the Jags. But the Jaguars can very well put up 35, in which case the 9 is irrelevant. Like, would that shock anyone? Of course not. Also, everyone's hurt, but not everyone has cluster injuries in the same way the Texans do on the offensive line. They can't run the ball. They're not relying on CJ Stroud in his third game. And, like, yes, the Jaguars are beatable, but I trust Trevor Lawrence. I trust the coaching staff, and as much as we get the fuckery we always have of just those, like, painful plays, that's built in. They're too good fundamentally.
It's part of the
Trevor
risk
Lawrence
premium
is too
of,
good.
Of betting on the Jags.
Yeah. And, like, what comes with that is generally actually going for the fourth downs as opposed to punting. And, like, yeah, they might pitch it to, you know, their backup running back on some bonehead play call, but, like, at least they actually got the basic thing right, which is actually putting themselves in a situation to succeed. And over time, I'm willing to still lean into the Jags. That's the thing. We should have learned this last year, which is we leaned into the Jags. We leaned into the Jags. It hurt us. And in the end, the Jags were certainly my most profitable team that I bet on. For sure.
I'm not abandoning our long-term Jags thesis. I'm just saying it would have been nice to see definitive growth spurt from them this year.
It's early.
Still early. All right. That wraps up our first episode. Again, had a little bit of a clunky start to the year. Even this episode, again, still a little bit clunky, still getting the rhythm back, getting the show flow together. But we'll be back in rhythm starting next week. We'll see you then. And that's closing bet.